Fire entrapment of 2021. We have two Forest Service personnel, Captains Tom Guzman and Abel Martinez. Captain Guzman is 24 years in the Angeles National Forest, married for 20 years, has 3 kids. Abel Martinez has 19 years of service in the Angeles National Forest, the last 6 as a captain. His work experience includes hand crews, engines, and helicopter attack. In the presentation of the route fire, they will discuss the initial initial engagement. Fire conditions can change in a matter of minutes in firefighter evacuation. And first up is Captain Martinez. Please welcome Captain Abel Martinez.
Good afternoon. Just like you said, that was at the time my 18th year. 5th as a captain. All my time as a captain was there in that general area, which is highly prone to fires. This is Tom.
So I'm what's known as a fire prevention patrol in the Angeles. What that means is I wear 3 different hats. So the first one is fire suppression. I staff a patrol truck that's used as an IA resource. And I'm also available to cover for engine bosses. And I can also take out, we have 20-person type 2 crews that can also serve as initial attack, or they can be call needed and they go out wherever they're needed in California or elsewhere in the country. Second hat is I joke and I say I'm a mall cop. You know, I'm not armed, but I'm a forest protection officer, which means that when people are breaking our regulations, my job is to go out and try to correct them. And then that also involves fire investigation. And then the third thing I do, which is the fire prevention piece, has to do with public education, and that's where I try to spend my time, is the public education piece. But because we are the Angeles National Forest, those first 2 hats, typically get a lot more attention than that last hat. So we were asked to come and talk about the route fire. Now there is a lot of different ways that we can talk about it. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and what I wanted to get across is one of the things that in this presentation here, we aren't looking so much at tactics. We're going to talk a little bit about tactics because obviously that affects the way that things turn out. And we're also not just going to start playing videos and looking at photos because that there's only so much value in that. Really what I want to talk about and what we want to kind of get into is the decisions that were made and some of that decision-making process and the thoughts we had. And before we get into it, and Abel's going to give you the background, but before we get into it, I just want us to kind of consider how decision-making and safety, it has a little bit of a different twist when it comes to public safety. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times we look at safety as this idea that we're going to do whatever we can do to be safe, whatever maximizes our safety, that's what we're going to do. Yet in public safety, we are really in the job of compromising our safety in different ways. And what I mean by that is, just consider the North Hollywood shootout, right? Where you have, let's say, 2 or 3 officers on scene and they're confronted with 2 gunmen with automatic rifles. Now, all the other officers in the area, they could have stayed safe, right? They could have stayed where they were at and they'd be safe. But by them going to where they were needed, they were increasing their personal risk, right? So their safety is decreasing, and yet the purpose of that is to increase safety overall, including the public and also police officers. And so that's kind of, I think, one twist that gets missed when we start talking about safety and risk mitigation is a lot of times we're making decisions that are really hard to make. And so just, as an example, the tick fire from just a few years ago, I'm coming up and I can see that there's a Santa Ana wind-driven fire crossing the road and it's headed right towards a house. And I stop and ask a lady, do you know if anyone lives there? And she says, yes, a family lives there. And so now, again, I can stay perfectly safe where I'm at and say, man, that really stinks that there's a family living in that home. right? Or I can do something. And that is the decision that we're always facing, is we're always weighing our personal safety with the safety of other people. And so the final answer really isn't whatever keeps me safe. That's not the final answer. We have to weigh some different things and make some difficult decisions. And so in my mind, it kind of looks like chopping a tree. If you had a perfectly sound tree, and that represents our safety, really, when we try to increase overall safety or increase somebody else's safety, we start chopping at our own personal safety. And the question is, how much of that tree can we take away without it falling over? And so we have some things to help us with that. And I think that's how I like to think of the 10s and 18s. The 10s and the 18s, LCES, that is a tool. That is what we use to know where the line is that we shouldn't cross. Now, the thing with the 10s and 18s is the 10s and 18s are only as good as we can apply them. And so there is very much a limit to the training that we can have and the instruction that we're given in applying the 10s and 18s. And I can just give you a really basic example. Is there any, if I'm on a hose lathe and I got, big flame lengths in front of me and I got cool black, 100 feet behind me, is there any direction that says, you need to be able to get to your safety zone 90 seconds before the fire gets to you, right? There is no time factor. And where that really dawned on me was once I was hiking into a fire and we were about 45 minutes in and I realized my safety zone is 45 minutes away. And so now what I'm doing is I'm trying to guess how long it's going to take the fire to get there, which is my subjective judgment, and how long I think we're going to be able to get there. And the point is, there are definitely some limitations when it comes to how we're going to apply the 10s and 18s, but nevertheless, the 10s and 18s and LCES are that line in the sand that we're trying to figure out how to apply it. And so with that, that is I think that's really what I'm wanting us to get out of this, is to look at how we make decisions, to look at some of the decisions we made. And I think if you can try to put yourselves in our shoes, the goal is to try to be able to encounter new situations that you've never encountered before and try to act in a way that your decisions are tactically sound, they're timely, and they're decisive. And with that, we'll start with Abel. Abel's going to give you a little bit of background on what we were looking at that day.
All right, so that morning for us, it's 9/11, the date of the incident. So we started off at a memorial in the AV for us on two engines, engine 15 and 17, and then crew 81. So for us, our day started early, going up to the AV, to the memorial, and starting our day off with that. A quick snapshot as far as fuels for that time of year. So for my station, we take fuel samples, which we collect each local chemise, put it in an oven, weigh it, and we get to know how much moisture is in there. We had been really, really low, drastically low, and for a longer period of time, a lot earlier than what we're used to. So the fuels, the brush component for us at that time was really burning what you would expect for dry grass. So you weren't gonna have the same rates of spreads as you would think of for the brush component. It's really just running through it like it was blade grass, basically. Staffing wise, it seems to be an issue, and it's getting worse and worse year by year. And it's just in the public service industry, right? We're not the only ones with the Forest Service. It's all of us. So for us, we're not so much a rank-based organization, meaning that only captains are allowed to run the engines. It's qualification-based. So Tom, being a patrolman, has the qualification to run that engine. He filled in for 17s that day. Just to give you a quick understanding of that, if it wasn't already known. So for those three engines, and I mentioned the third one because I'm actually the captain for engine 16 and not 15. So my engine left up north on a strike team assignment. Myself, my assistant operator, and one of my firefighters got left behind. My assistant operator and my firefighter were with Tom that day. I myself went up to staff engine 15 with those guys. So those three engines, when we talk about camaraderie, that brotherhood, we emphasize it and we live that. That's really important to us, so those 3 engines mainly. So I have that working relationship with them, I have that bond with them, and that kind of plays a big role as we go through this presentation. So
Values at risk.
was that
Values at risk
values and risks?
in the area.
Also, where the fire was, just across the freeway, there's like a mobile home park. So that was the biggest value at risk when we got to the fire. Just up the road, north of the fire, was one of our fire stations, being an Oak Flat fire station. There are some homes on the south side of the fire. Basically, there's 2 roads, the 99 and the 5, which the 99 runs parallel with the 5, with about 500,000 feet separation.
Yeah.
Let's see, where was I going with that?
Values at risk, cooperators.
Yeah, cooperators. So what is the I-5, the 14 freeway, Santa Clarita Valley? We run all the time with Valley County. It's pretty much they're our buddies. Like we have a really close working relationship with them because they're on every fire that we're on, and we're on every fire that's their dirt, to say, their DPA. So that is a common thing. There's a lot of trust, there's a lot of training that goes within our local cooperators. So that trust has already been on there, that working relationship is already built in there, and that's a standard pretty much for that given area. Anything else I'm missing? If there is, I'll go back. Oh, one thing, last time you staffed an engine before that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of little details that we're leaving out just because there's only so much time. But just to give you an idea of some of those details, Abel asked me afterwards, he was like, hey, when was the last time that you've been engine boss? Well, I don't know, a month ago. And he said, but when was the last time you've been on actual fire as an engine boss? And I think it had been 2 years. And the time before that had probably been, 2 years. So even though I'm regularly engine bossing and taking out Type 2 crews, my experience in running crews like that is actually, I'm trying to think how to say this. It's there's lots of rust, I guess you could say, right? There's some unfamiliarity there, and so I think that became significant. And on this day, because we were a mixed crew, I specifically told my engine crew, I'm like, hey, we're going to take it slower today because we don't know, we don't normally work together, and obviously there are hazards that creates. And so that day, the fire went out, I think it was about 15:54 is when the call went out. And so we went en route, and about 16:13 is when you had some of the LA County flight crews and hand crews, and there was quite a few LA County engines showing up. And from my perception, initially, it was that we're going to show up, there's going to be lots of people on scene, we're not going to have to take, much of an aggressive role. However, the way that things developed, and again, we're skipping lots of details, the way that things developed, there was a lot of confusion as far as where the fire was at exactly because of the smoke and a few other things. There was also some confusion as to what divisions had been established. And the IC had actually, the Forest Service IC had just taken that role just a minute or two before I arrived on scene. So I arrived on scene, and actually, before I go there, why don't you just go to the next one. This view's looking north. The Golden State Highway is to the left, the I-5 is to the right. And next one. We had a lot of traffic, and eventually traffic backs up. Again, this is looking north. And that was probably our greatest value at risk, was all these cars that were just stopped on the freeway, and we had some pretty significant fire. Next one. Some pretty significant fire that was, that was close to them. So about 1613, you had, next. 1613, you had the county that was engaged in the initial attack, and they're trying to go from the Golden State up to the freeway. And due to fire behavior, they weren't having much success. Next. So this is our view when we came on scene at 1626. Just before I got off the freeway, I contacted the IC and I said, "What's your assignment?" And he said, "Go on the Golden State North." There was a lot of radio traffic. It wasn't going to be easy to get clarification. So just reading between the lines with all the confusion that was already happening, the instructions, go Golden State North, I took that to mean go north on the Golden State, which is where we're going, and see what we can do. And as we drove through, you can go to the next one. You can pause it there. So at 1626, we drive through and I look to the left. There's lots of unburned, but I know the fire's going to spot and I know that we're not going to stop it. I look to the right and I see a lot of fighting going on. It's not very successful. So my plan was to go through the smoke and fire to the far side, further north, where we actually had visibility to see the full fire. And at that point, the plan was to stay ahead of the fire far enough that we were safe, close enough that we can engage when we had the opportunity, whether it's air support or changing fuels, and we can go direct. But at that point, there was no intention on going direct until we got some kind of change in conditions. At about 1631, this photo is taken from engine. So my engine was engine 317. Abel was staffing engine 315. And so this was taken from his folks as they were getting off the freeway just a few minutes after us. Go to the next. And again, looking north, you can see the fire is now spotting about the time that they are arriving. Next. About the time that they're arriving at scene. And as they're driving north, one of the guys takes some video. Well, go ahead and play this. This is looking south. That's my engine. And we are just now passing by the fire. And we're going to pull out a little bit further in front. And that's the position that we'd like to stay. We'd like to keep rolling out in front. And this is the video. That's a spot fire that has crossed the highway, and this is taken from 315 spokes. We're further north of their location. As they're driving north, they're trying not to run the folks over on the road. So the amount of fire that was present on that side of the road, it wasn't. They didn't fully pick up on it because their emphasis was in all the smoke. It's not run over these guys on the road. So at 1634, this is the view out their front window. That's us in 317 out in front of them. And you can see the dozer at this point is passing us off to the right. You see that's a Forest Service water tender. They're all headed out. At this point in time, they've taken their best shot at catching that spot fire, and it hasn't worked out. However, there's another spot fire that's a little bit smaller, and it's right out 315's left door. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so I tied in briefly with engine 315, and the plan was they were going to do what they could do on the left side, and we were going to do what we could do on the right side. Next. And so at this point, 1636, there's a few things going on. We pull hose, that's us on the left. Am I blocking? Probably blocking you guys, huh? Sure. So that's us on the left, pull in hose, and the intent was to have the hose ready, charged, as we're rolling up the highway, so that way we can engage, again, when that opportunity comes. But at this point, there was no intent to engage just yet. 315 is on the right. Let's go to the next one. And one more. So 315 is on the right, and they are pulling hose packs, and they are going to start a progressive. The fire had laid down. They were trying to get a handle on the smaller spot fire. Next one. And pretty quickly, what is it, 1637? Pretty quickly, both sides of the road, the fire brigade were picked up, and they were chased out of there. 1638, they came and they passed us. Go ahead and pause it there. And when they passed us, they stopped. Abel got out and he came and he talked to me and he said, "Hey, I think it's time for us to go. We got to get out of here." And there was a little bit of confusion as to which engine he was on. In any case, I told him, "No, we're fine as long as we stay out in front, ahead of the fire. We'll be okay." And so it was later, a few minutes after that, Dan, or maybe right around the same time, the foreman for Crew 8, which is, there's two crews right there. One of them is Crew 8-3, the other is Crew 12?
12-3-8-1.
12-3-8-1. So there's two crews there, and one of their foremen came to me, and he told me the same thing. He said, I think it's time for us to pull out. And I said, as long as we are, staying ahead of the fire. And when I said we, I meant my engine. We're fine. There's a couple key things here, and this is kind of what I would say, like tactics-wise. And when we talk about the 10s and 18s, this is kind of the moment where we can debate and people can go back and forth, and everyone can have their opinion as to what should have been done or what could have been done. This is the moment though where for myself I can identify it was a pretty significant mistake that I made. Up until this point, I had positioned myself so I could clearly see both sides of the fire, and I knew what it was doing. About this moment, which was about the time that Abel came up to me, the smoke made the fire on the west side, which is the spot fire side. The smoke made the fire hard to see, and the topography, as you can tell to the right, now we're coming up to a cut bank. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, I was trying to see the fire and what it was going to do, and I told myself, it's just going to keep going up towards the ridge. It's going to keep going out to the west. And so really, at that moment, what I had done is I had lost sight of the fire, and I had failed to realize that because I could not see the main fire, I was no longer an effective lookout for my crew. Eventually, I did realize that fact, and that was when that was when we started to pull out. But that was kind of a key moment. Was I didn't realize when I lost sight of the fire and the significance of that. So at this point, we are at 1640 is when this photo was taken, and we're going to back up a little bit because I'm going to hand the mic over to Abel, and he's going to kind of talk to you about his thoughts and his decision-making process and what he did at the moment he talked to me and the minutes afterwards.
All right, so going from that initial picture where it shows us getting off the freeway until the time of the entrapment was roughly 15 minutes. So for that day, I had the operator that was for the operator for 315. He was filling a trainee role, being the engine boss, or kind of like the captain running the truck. Very dialed individual, about 7 years on very light hot shots, just moved over to the engine. So very trustworthy. His captain had already said, hey, he's good to go. So like, all right, we'll keep you in the seat and we'll keep mentoring you. A second set of eyes, So he's sitting and basically running that trainee role. I'm operating for him that day. As we go through up the 99, really smoky. Our focus really was not trying to run someone over in that environment because there's so many people on the road. So that spot fire that Tom was describing, there's really already another one, a bigger one established that we totally missed because our focus was on not running anybody over. But our mindset going into it was like, so smoky, the fire behavior, we're not going to be able to do a whole lot today unless we have fire support or it lays back down on itself. Our initial assignment was to basically take it from the 99, head east, and tie it into the 5 freeway. The fire had basically 3 active flanks. West of the 5, you had the south flank, the north flank, and east of the 5, you had another flank, basically that spotted across the freeway. So you had 3 active flanks, and that plays a role because of the aircraft. And a quick go back, the communications plan. So there's just one command, one TAC, and our air to ground. And you had your initial attack response from LA County, and then you had first and second alarm from the Angeles. So that amount of people on one TAC channel. So it plays a big role. So for us, once we get to where we can see 317, they're already on what we're supposed to do. So they're already on basically what looks like they're going to start anchoring and start working towards the 5. Where we keep hearing, hey, we don't want it to cross the 99. So we're like, well, it already did. So we see the dozer starting to try to pinch off the spot fire that we're seeing. We go on the north side of that spot and try to engage, and that picture shows you that if you go back a little bit, when we got off, we were like, okay, I think we could engage, and it laid back down on itself. Fire behavior was minimal. It literally took them less than a second from going from that environment to where we're running out, dropping those bags, getting in front of the engine, and getting out of there in a matter of like less than a second. So that, just for us, further reinforced the fact that we weren't going to do anything that day safely until we had those right conditions. So we discussed it, and we started kind of looking around, and what we observed was that the fire on the upper west side by the ridge was actually starting to move faster than it was on the road, and it was doing that also just east of us. So our concern was that eventually it was going to outpace us and then barrel down upon the road. Winds for that day were southwest 10 to 20, so that would play into that factor later on as well. Another thing that many people comment is there's an odd amount of firewalls, basically a lot. And you can see that with the column itself, and then just those factors playing in that at the ground level, winds were going from east to west, but at the very top, basically being sheltered from the bridge, they were going opposite direction from west to east. So for us, once we got scurried out, we said, okay, there's like a brake check for semis just north of the road, pretty wide area. We said, okay, we're going to go up to Whitaker brake check, that's what it's called, and we're going to reevaluate. That's the plan. That is the correct decision to make right now. We're going to pull out and we're going to go there. We did not do that. Part of it was we started observing, like he had mentioned, they started pulling out their hose, which was 1.5 inches. And for us, 1.5 inches and having to drag it just ahead of the fire, that takes a lot of effort. So for us, it said they're pretty committed to what they're doing, and I don't know if they're seeing what we're seeing right now. So our plan then was to go a couple hundred feet ahead of them and try to get them to that initial conversation with Tom, hey, we got to go. We go a couple hundred feet, kind of wait for them, and we're not getting what we wanted, right? We didn't want to get them to disengage. So we wait, and we keep trying to get them on the radio. But the radio is just so overpacked. One tactical channel for so many resources. Is that kind of a good time to break it off?
Yeah. So it's the decision that Abel is making is keep going north or wait for us, and so that was kind of a key moment where he's trying to stay close enough to where maybe he can offer some assistance, yet he's trying to push further up the road where it's safer. So go ahead and go to the next picture. There's I guess 3 things I want to point out. Actually, why don't you just go ahead and watch this so you can see the fire behavior. This is looking east. This is on the other side of the freeway, looking back, and the old 99 or the Golden State Highway is on the other side of the freeway. And you can see the fire is working its way up and around the cut bank, and it's going to go straight up, and then it's going to come straight down the other side, and we are in that pocket.
Quick go back with that is because of everything that's happening, right, our situational awareness is going to automatically go to the most dangerous portion. We lose basically the essay that it basically goes from a 4-lane highway down to a 2-lane highway. That cut bank that you see, we lose sight of that top portion, which is just west of us. So we kind of have this in the back of their heads that we know it's going to outpace us, and that window is closing. Now that's a judgment call. How quick is that window going to close?
So he mentioned that we were dragging hose, we were dragging 1.5 inches, we were trying to stay ahead of the fire. We moved slower than I anticipated, and so the fire is getting closer and closer to us. And so a key moment for me is when I finally say, okay, it's time for us to get out. It's time for us to use our escape route and go north. But because we're so close to the fire, it takes us a few minutes to be able to get some distance from the fire before we can safely disconnect and load up the crew. So we finally do disconnect, and everyone pushes north on foot, and we catch up to 315. So 315 is right in front of engine 317, which is pictured here. And as we catch up, talk briefly with Abel. Yeah, well, fire's crazy. Yeah, let's load up and go. Before I continue, you're about to watch a short video clip, and this video clip at this point is where the video clip starts. It is about 65 seconds away before we start receiving radiant heat burns. And that just kind of gives you an idea of how quickly things start to happen. I talked about decision making, and so one thing I want you to kind of key in on is, as we're watching this next section, is behind us is a county engine that is coming north, and he is doing what most of everyone else is doing. He's recognized that it's time to go. So he's going north. As he's going north, all of a sudden, there's a few things he sees. As he is passing us, he recognizes that the fire is now crossing in front of him, and that the escape route is threatened, and it's also going to potentially impact his engine. The other thing he has to consider is their captain was out on foot doing some, coordinating with the crews, and so he's also looking, trying to keep one eye on the fire, one eye on the captain, and then a third eye on what he recognizes is the hand crew that you're gonna see, and trying to figure out if he can offer them assistance. And then his fourth eye is looking past where the fire is cutting them off and recognizing that there's another crew that is running. There's another clip, I don't know if we have them here, but these guys are running. And so he pauses, and in that pause, recognizes that the crew is not going to load in his engine, and so they continue, and they actually pick up some of the guys from the crew that was further ahead and help them with their egress to get out of there. And that's kind of, all these decisions we're talking about are decisions that happened in seconds. So let's go ahead and it's about a minute or so for the next video.
Along the way, Tom had communications with 81. We did as well. Like, hey, we just need to get out of here. We kind of assumed okay, well, they're on foot, but they're walking out towards where the brake check. So we kind of lose sight of them. We're kind of okay. They're heading that direction. For us on 315, it didn't become apparent that they didn't get to that point until that position. And for us, so you hear the air horns basically blasting, and for us, we had already about that point loaded up and said, okay, we're going, but now we're blocked. So that's where the air horns come in. We're trying to get them get going, and talking to operators, they had their good reasons, right? They're waiting for their engine captains to catch up and hopefully jump in the truck, and they're seeing the same environment. One of the engines, I think the lead one in the front, actually shielded, I believe it was 12-3 as they made their way out and through what you're seeing there in the video. But them being there actually gave us the opportunity to recognize that 8-1 was still there. So a lot of this, and then, you know, going back a few and going forward, is that I believe there's a divine power and things happen for a reason. So yeah, you don't want to block the road, but if they hadn't been there, we might have took off and not even seen them. So us, you know, maybe staying behind, trying to make sure that Tom and 17s pulls out. If we don't do that, and if we move ahead and we go to what was the right decision, which was to go to Whitaker brake check, that second engine isn't there to fit the crew. Going back to the dispatch portion, I was unable to confirm whether or not we were on the response. We went anyways. We were like, okay, well, we'll cancel somebody on the way. It's common practice, right? We were unable to copy the engines. Eventually, we ended up going second alarm, so we were on it anyways. But that 15-minute gap, like I talked about earlier, where we went from getting off the freeway to the entrapment, that would have pretty much taken us out of the picture. So there's a few little instances where I guess we were just meant to be there.
So what you saw there was another key decision where the foreman for the crew recognizes that their escape route is threatened, and he sees that there's an option when the engine stops, and I don't know if you noticed, but the door actually opened, and then there's this dilemma as to whether or not he's going to separate his crew. The thing was, with this crew, besides the foreman, there was the next most experienced firefighter had 4 years, and some of them, it was their first fire. It was a very green crew, and so as he's basically trying to maintain control of the crew in that environment, and so for him, again, we're talking about really critical decisions made in seconds as to whether he's going to split his crew or not. And so he pauses, and then in that pause, that's when the engine goes and assists the next crew up, and that's when things unfolded as you're watching. But let me back up a little bit. Abel's account and my account are a little bit different, obviously. And so for myself, I was so, up to this point, I was so engrossed in watching the fire behavior up until this point that my situational awareness, I wasn't able to watch who was around me. So even though I talked to their foreman, I didn't know who he was. I didn't even realize he was with the crew. So up to this point, I had no idea that there was even a crew in the area. And so the first, as things played out, what we're leaving out about fire behavior is this fire overall had an overall slow progression. On average, it was less than 1 mile an hour. But what it would do is it would lay down, and then it would surge forward and explode forward, and then it would drop down and hang out there for a few minutes, and then it would surge forward. And so I had watched that cycle at least 3 or 4 times. And so as I loaded up in the engine, again, not knowing that the crew was there, I jump in the engine. As I'm looking out, to me, it was crystal clear that we were right at the beginning. I shouldn't say right at the beginning. We were well into the early stages of one of those surges forward. And so what that meant to me is I'm getting in the engine, I'm thinking to myself, wow, we really cut this close because we're just getting out in time. Because everything around us is about to be on fire. And then I turned in my seat and looked forward, and I saw the back of 2 engines. And immediately, without knowing what was going on, it was, my instant reaction was air horn. Like, everyone needs to move forward and go. Then I saw a helmet cross in front of my engine, and then I was completely confused because I'm trying to figure out what would anybody be doing there on foot. And as I follow the helmet, it goes to a group of guys, and when I see the group of guys, instantly I recognize that it's a crew. And for me, everything had shifted from, wow, we're getting out just in time, to all of a sudden realizing that we all can't get out. for myself, when I talk about decisions, the best way to understand what happened at that moment was, for me, there was really no decision-making process in that moment. It was when I saw them, I jumped out and I ran to them, and that was like, it was more of a reaction. And I think it's helpful to kind of think about some of the things that go into a reaction like that. And I guess there's three things that I would point to. One has to do with your own personal ethics and morals. So for myself, there's one of the most common, themes in the Bible is putting others ahead of yourself. So that's something that is, rooted in me. The second one would have to do with understanding responsibility. I've taken out Type 2 crews for a long time as a crew boss, and one day I thought to myself, wow, would I actually stick my neck out for these guys, because I don't even know them. And then I kind of realized, yeah, I think I would have to, because that's my role as a crew boss. And then as I continued in my career and I passed the 20-year mark, then I started realizing it's not just my crew. Anytime I'm out on the fire, for any of us that have been around, our job is to look out, especially for the newer firefighters. So that would be the second piece. And then the third piece would have to do, I feel like, with having been in other really bad situations. And what I've recognized in the past is there's times where you have to make decisions, and there's no second guessing. There's no, weighing the options. You just have to make the best snap judgment you can, and that's it. Good or bad, you have to live with the consequences. And so in that moment, the way that I reacted was based on all three of those things. That's what brought me out to them. And as we started coming back, there was no time for conversation. The only thought that I had in my head as I was trying to count everyone is coming to the conclusion, because I thought they were all getting my engine. Abel thought they were all getting in his engine. And so my thought was, they're not all going to fit. And so that was all I had time to think as they were loading up. And the next thing I know, I'm on the other side of the engine. And there is, at first, I felt like burning on my face. Eventually, that burning turned to ice, and that's where I started realizing, like, this is really bad, because it doesn't feel like, it feels like ice water that's, all over me. And thinking that there was no more room in the engine, at that point, it's just a matter of weighing my options. I'm looking around me, I realize I can't run. I can't deploy in the road because there's so much equipment. You saw the dozer, there's so much equipment. If I deploy on the road, I'm going to die. And so, I actually jumped up on the engine hoping the engine would drive out. It was way too hot up there. And so in the end, I come back to the realization that I have to deploy. And so I start to take off my gear, and that's when John Quinones opens the door. And in that, before that moment came, as I was weighing those different options, time slows down. To actually tell the story, like just in that moment, it's about 20 minutes. But during that time, as I was looking around, I realized that I was going to die. And I don't mean it to say like I was afraid, like I thought I might die, but I had, looking at the fire behavior, looking at what was going down, I made the conclusion that this is it. Like I'm watching my last moments. And it was the overwhelming feeling that I had was just sadness. Like, I'm like, man, this really stinks, because this was a really lame fire to die on. There wasn't anything special about it at all. And so at that point, it was kind of reluctantly, I'm like, well, okay, I guess I'm going to deploy. And so that's when I started going through the process. And that's when the door opened, and I jumped in. And when I jumped in, it actually takes me a moment. You're going to see when I get in, I'm kind of like, I don't say anything, because it actually takes me a few seconds to kind of shift gears from, well, I'm going to die, to I didn't die, and what's going on, and now, okay, now we need to get out of here. But go ahead and you can play the next. Hold on real quick, pause it. Yeah.
What was causing the surge in rates to spread? Was it wind driven, or is it fuel at the bottom?
No, it was fuel. So the fuel there is you have grass, you have brush, you have like an oak overstory, and the oaks were big oaks, everything's burning. And so what would happen is, as it would build in intensity, those oaks would go and they would just launch spots. And when they would explode and launch those spots, then everything would drop down, and then you would have more like a normal surface fire. But then what would happen then is, as that's generating heat, then it's moved into the next group of oaks. And those oaks then, just as they start to explode, all those spot fires out in front of them at that same time are reaching their maturity. So those spot fires in front explode at the same time the oaks explode, and then that in turn launches more spot fires. So that's why we had that movement where it would surge forward and drop down. Surge forward and drop down. And so at this moment, it was just a matter of surging forward. And then also, I don't know if you caught on the video, actually there's a video at the end where you can see the column starting to rotate. And there's also a rotating column in here that gets factored in. So you can go ahead and play the next one. And we're at...
I remember seeing two crews. So the reason I'm driving super grandma mode is I'm thinking I have people hanging off whatever rail they can hang on because it's two crews. So that's why I'm trying to go just fast enough so the motor won't cut out, but not too fast that people are going to fall off.
So we're at about 47 minutes. Do you guys need us to cut it off right now, or do you want us to wrap it up in 2 minutes, or what are we looking at? We probably need about 5 more, but we can, like I said, we can. 5. Okay. So go ahead and play this next clip, and you're going to see the column starting to rotate. This is looking south. And it was that rotating that once that fire came up to the top of the cut bank, it sucked it back down. And it was the finger that was out in front of us. Next one. So later, I don't know, 15 minutes later, our dozer swamper took a picture. That's where our engine was. You can see my helmet and my pack on the ground. There was a tool and a saw that you saw that were left. And then this is us regrouping at 16:52. Let's go to the next one, then I'll let you talk. You can pause it there. Did you want to talk about how that kind of wrapped up a little bit?
Yeah, we eventually got everybody in. By sheer luck, it was a 50-50 split. There was 2 LA County engine captains as well with the crew, and there really wasn't time to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, you go that way. So again, it happened by miracle. So we go on, we go through the flames, you drive out. Eventually, Tom and an additional firefighter go in. At first, I go and talk to Tom. He's like, "Am I burned? Am I good?" I'm like, "Man, you look good. You know, nothing was evident. You know." So a lot of that, and I want to talk about it because we go through it, and it almost like, did this really just happen? You know, so our mind wants to minimize it. And I won't get into too much detail, but there's several factors afterwards that really just help minimize it. Because for one, like for us 8-1 and 315, we went back and re-engaged. So that just helped minimize the whole situation. What else was I supposed to speak on with that?
Let me, I can pass it back to you. But yeah, so when we came out, I thought we've all read, you've either seen it or you've read about skin hanging off, right? That's how you know when someone's burned and the skin's just hanging off their arms or off their face, whatever. I thought my skin was hanging off my face. That's what it felt like. And so when I came to Abel and said, you know, how's my face? And he said, no, you're good. My first thought was like, man, I'm such a, I'm just overreacting, you know, because I'm probably fine, but I knew I had some kind of burns because my arm hurt, my face and my neck, my ears, everything hurt. And eventually we made our way to, and there was a discussion about, you know, whether we're going to declare an IWI. And the thing was, help was on the other side of the fire. And so I wanted to get to help, and I didn't want to have to sit there as help tries to work their way through the freeway traffic to get, and the fire, you know, to get to us. So I talked to Abel, and we said, okay, I'm gonna take my engine and we're gonna go to ICP because that's where the paramedics are. And on the way there, I called ICP, told them what had happened, and then we got some treatment. And that was, yeah. Do you have anything else to add? That's kind of, I wanted to leave time for questions as well. I know we don't really have much time, so if anyone has questions, you can certainly ask them now.
What was the total number of people that fit in both trucks?
So we had 12, and they had 11. It was 23 total. And the doors weren't shutting right.
And I know there was a little chuckle when you see the video and like, oh, they went in there with the McLeod, but there really wasn't a quarter second to spare to really throw your gear off, chainsaws. For us in 315, one of our guys got one of the saw dogs in their neck, but there was really no other option. There was no time.
These were new firefighters that if you did not tell them to drop the tool, they were not going to drop the tool. Right? And so for myself, as I'm bringing them back, I'm trying to plan ahead and figure out and it never occurred to me that they were going to bring the tool inside. You know, so I'm glad that our Sawyer at least dropped his saw. Theirs had the saw inside. But any other?
But was your helmet run over or was that helmet?
It was run over. Yep.
Well, I hope that's some sort of Guinness record for most firefighters in a fire truck. You got to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Tom, what was your actual burn injury?
So it was, they were second degree. It was just second degree from, you know, like basically from ear, across my face to ear. There was actually like very little first degree burn and here in my arm. And it took them a while. They couldn't tell if I had some spots of third degree, but then at the end, a few weeks later, as it was healing, they said no, it's just second degree. But it was pretty deep, and it's funny because looking back now I can say I understand that those are classified as minor burns. But in my career, like we've all had minor burns, right? You don't go to the hospital for minor burns, and so to me there should be something between minor burns and these kind of minor burns. But I couldn't sleep for 3 nights, you know, like sitting up and like propped up on a pillow, trying not to, you know, move. But yeah, I'm good now, as you can see.
You're very good. Thank you both for the presentation. I have these cool mugs for you to take to your next fire. From enforcers and fire wardens, thank you very much for your presentation, for sure. This is what we're about. It's about learning and sharing that experience from the firefighter perspective on. I do have a question, though. I don't know. Okay, you got this experience now. You got this slide in your carousel, and you're on your next fire down the road. I mean, do you have it? Would you do anything different on the next, in a similar situation?
I think for sure, and like if you guys have any additional questions or lessons learned, there is a lot of lessons learned, and we're open to having that conversation outside. Because really, it could probably be a 2 to 3 hour presentation if we dive into lessons learned or we start talking about the Swiss cheese and what led us to that point. Bigger picture, like, yeah, we need like 2 to 3 hours.
You know, for me, the biggest thing that I realized afterwards is I knew that I had a mixed crew. And when I say mixed crew, there was 4. We were actually 4 different modules that were on my engine. So we were definitely a mixed crew. And what I was doing with those guys was, in my experience, you know, it was really simple, right? But it was a non-traditional tactic. In the Forest Service, we don't pull 1.5-inch hose and go mobile with it. That's just not what we do. And so I was asking a crew that I didn't really work with to do this non-traditional tactic out in front of some very significant fire behavior. And so for myself, looking back at that, I'm stepping back and saying, you know what? On that fire, I should have, you know, as I talked about making decisions and risk and all that kind of stuff, for myself, that's the big thing, is looking at it is I did not have a good grasp on how the lack of cohesiveness was going to affect us. And so moving forward, I'm going to be a lot more aware of that, and I'm much more likely to be less aggressive with a crew in that situation. Well, a crew that's not my crew. And also, you know, considering the fact that running an engine crew takes, it's a whole different set of skills than, let's say, managing a 20-person crew on an extended attack fire. It's just a little bit different.
Thank you very much. Good job. Good job. What a great, humble presentation. Thank you so much. I'm sure it helped a lot of the firefighters in the room.